Welcome to Zennurgize, the interactive podcast providing resources for building a better life. I am Zen Ase. I am your conduit, your catalyst, and your coach to that better life. A coach draws out hidden potential in the subject, a catalyst sparks change, and a conduit provides a connection. So today I am connecting you to Gwen C. Say hi to the people.
Hello, hello.
So she has a long bio. You can check out, the event information. She's a poet. She's done slam, from what I remember. She has a book out. She works with diversity and inclusion training. And so we are going to talk about bias today, because Zennurgize is all about trying to provide you fuel for your mind, body, and soul, and to challenge some of the limiting beliefs that we have. And I think bias is a big one because if you are biased, you could lose out on a lot of opportunities because you're just not even open to the possibilities. And so I was actually doing a little research on bias. We all know that bias is kind of a prejudice or a preference. And it's normally a negative thing that people give into that limits their ability to see people as they are, situations as they are, because they already have this filter up where they're filtering everything through this lens. And so even though they see certain facts, the facts are not as important as their bias that is telling them that the facts mean something that the facts may not mean. And that's why I think a lot of people say statistics, you can make them say anything you want because you can put your bias on those statistics and spin them. And we all hear about the spin that's placed on events and, changing the wording of something, changing the clips that you use. You could have a whole scene and you pick a certain clip because that clip fits your bias and fits the bias of your audience. And so I think that as consumers of media, we have to be aware that there are groups with certain biases that are trying to get us to buy into their bias and support their bias. And we have to hopefully try to be objective and look at things from both sides. So when you think of bias, Gwen, what comes to your mind?
So I think it's a lot for me. It always starts with hidden. Every time I think of bias, I think of things that we don't know exist within us. Those preferences, we know it's a preference, like you said. We know it's our filtering, but it seems for me, it's always the focus on the hidden ones that we think we don't have. We think we're doing all the right things. We think we're being the right type of person. We think we're inclusive when we're not. I am probably guilty of it as well. I'm sure there's times in my life where I've been guilty of it. And, it's how do you know if it's hidden, right? You have to find it. And that's why I really liked the way you did with the event. You put on there the advertising bias, the conclusion bias. These are things that we don't think about. Up until just a few years ago, I don't think I really thought about advertising bias, probably until the Pepsi commercial with Kendall Jenner and how they set this tone that she could just simply fix the problems in the world, right? And that's not true. So I loved how you listed them all out in the event and gave us definitions because I don't think I know for a fact, I don't even think of what these different types of bias are and how these things are hidden in our everyday world. The other one, when you mentioned the trending popularity and just picking what's current so that people want to look like they're in the loop, we have to make sure that we're paying attention as regular folk, but we also have to look at celebrities that are stepping into the game at certain points because we don't want to, like you said, support folks that are doing things because it's trending or popular at the time. So when I think of bias, again, it's always what's hidden within us. If I had to choose in dealing with people who are biased, they know it, they're blatant about it, and those folks who don't know it, those folks are changeable because they don't know it and we can teach them. But at the same time, I think in a way it's more easy to deal with folks who are very blatant in their bias or, their bigotry. I hate to use that word, but we know what we're dealing with in those cases. When it's hidden and folks aren't even aware of it, that they have that hidden element, then it's even more challenging for us to identify it and help them to change it.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So you did mention some things that I put in the into the description of this event. So I'm going to
Mhm.
read a little bit from that description. According to the dictionary, bias is prejudice in favor or against one thing, group, or person in a manner considered to be unfair. So many of our problems in life and society are based on biases, many of them unconscious. Some biases are harmless, like chocolate or vanilla ice cream. Some are
Perfect.
more sinister. So here are some types just in the media. And you mentioned advertising bias. When what is shown is geared to attract or keep advertisers happy, effectively silencing some issues. So there
Mhm.
are advertisers who don't want, let's say, for example, Black Lives Matter to be associated with their product. So there are some companies who will say, oh, we are not going to let Colin Kaepernick be a spokesperson because that advertiser would take their, advertising dollars away because they don't want to be associated with that. And so when you have a group of advertisers that are kind of, in a sense, ganging up to say, we don't support X, then
Mhm.
those issues can actually be less widely known because they're, in a sense, silencing through their advertising dollars. So
Right.
that was one. Concision bias is reporting only on the views that are simple and easily digestible rather than the more nuanced or complex ideas. So this is kind of like those sound bites. You get all of these sound bites that are so easy to digest, and people don't have to think about them. They're slogans, and that's what is always in the news because it's so simple. But
Mhm.
people don't want to hear, well, the issue's not that simple. It's got all of these layers and all of these sides and all this complexity. They don't want to hear that
Mhm.
because that's going to make them think. And you
Right.
were talking about those people who are blatant, and then those people who are more, able to be flexible, and sometimes when you're able to kind of get them into that nuanced discussion, you're able to get them to see, oh, you have some biases, you
Mhm.
have some ideas that you hadn't really challenged. And I remember, I can see her face, but I cannot think of her name right now. The lady who did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment. Have you heard of that experiment?
I feel like it's vaguely familiar to me, but I don't recall it. Was it a while back?
It's, yeah, it was like in the 70s.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Basically, she wanted to show people what prejudice was like. And so what she did, they didn't know what they were coming to. They thought they were just coming to hear a speaker. And so she basically, outside of her venue, she had them divided into blue eyes and brown eyes. And the brown eyes all got, like, they had, the blue eyes had something pinned on them or like a scarf or something they had to wear. The brown eyes were all treated, they were seated first. They were brought snacks before the speech came in. They were very solicitous. Can we do anything to help you?
Right.
Are you comfortable? And then the blue eyes were left. They weren't talked to. They were just shunned. And then they were eventually seated, and everyone was very rude to them, as if they were taking up space, as if they
Mhm.
were less than, inferior. And
Mhm.
so throughout the whole presentation, she's seeking out the participation of the brown-eyed people. What do you think about that? Why don't you come in here and tell us what your thoughts are? What is your experience? And whenever any of the blue-eyed people wanted to um, speak, she would cut them off. She would talk down to them very condescendingly. And then eventually most of the people in the room understood what was happening. She was trying to get them to feel that prejudice isn't always burning a cross. It's not
Right.
always calling someone a racist epithet. It
Mhm.
is those subtle, what people call microaggressions.
Right.
It's seeing someone else treated much better than you for no other reason than just the color of their eyes, which
Mhm.
replaces the color of their skin, right? And so there were actually people in the blue-eyed group that refused to stay. They walked out. And she said, you signed up to go through, a diversity training, basically. And you expected it to be easy and pleasant. And you've only been here an hour. The people who are brown-eyed, many of them have been dealing with this every day of their lives, their whole
Mhm.
lives. I'm just trying to let you experience a little bit of it. a little bit of the microaggressions, a little bit of the disrespect, a little bit of being assumed to be inferior,
Mm-hmm.
being assumed that you have an attitude, being assumed that you're angry, being assumed that this or that, all of those biases that people have because they have been sold this idea that this race or this group or this gender, they all fit this pattern. And we're going to treat them like that, regardless of whether we even know if that's a true pattern or not.
Right.
And so a lot of people who watched it were like, oh my gosh, that's really what racism is. It's not, it's not the hoods and the, the
Mm-hmm.
burning of the crosses. It's all of the little things that people have to deal with every single day that
Right.
tell them you don't belong here. You are less than, you are not worthy. Don't even
Mm-hmm.
try to, fit in or whatever,
Right.
So that was one of those experiments kind of showing the biases that are out there. And you mentioned the popularity bias, reporting what's trendy to seem in the loop, avoiding lesser known, lesser known but important stories. And then we have the sensationalism, reporting the scandalous or gory to entice the rubberneckers who might ignore more newsworthy but boring stories. And then the bias against different demographics. So what is your background and how did you kind of get into See the Worth, which I think is a great title, and also kind of dealing with diversity and inclusion, how did you kind of come about that?
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
So background, Kentucky born, but Texas raised. I like to tell everybody that, a Galveston girl. And I think had I stayed in Kentucky, I would be a totally different person. Not saying that people here are bad, not saying that it's not diverse in some parts of the state, like Louisville, where I live. But I know for a fact I would have been raised differently. I would have been exposed to different people. I would have been exposed to more people that are just like me. I would have had a totally different life. So had my parents not taken me to Galveston at age 4, I probably would be a totally different person. I can't even imagine. The thoughts of not growing up the way that I did are scary and frightening to me. But See the Worth, that came after, that's my version of my movements for supporting Black Lives Matter. It's a track, a song, a poem, whatever. And I created that after, I was never the same after Tamir. Let's say that, when Tamir Rice was killed at 12, my son was 11. My oldest, I have 3 boys, and having an 11-year-old and seeing that, not to take away from any of the other killings, because that's not what I'm saying, but I was never the same after Tamir. I cared every time. I think all poets do. We want to change the world. We want to see equality, equity, all of those things, right? And so it always matters. But Tamir was just kind of like this turning point for me. And then I think that's when my poetry started to shift more into the scene of being political pieces and trying to make folks feel uncomfortable that do look like me, and not necessarily being concerned whether or not they're going to judge me more harshly than they already do, or if they're going to feel uncomfortable and never want to come to another event that I'm hosting or performing in because I made them uncomfortable. So that's when my poetry really started to shift into the political world. And then with Alton Sterling and Philando Castillo, with them happening a week apart, that was obviously a lot that year, just like again, just like the last year has been with Breonna and George Floyd. So it's just a continued cycle. But when Alton and Philando were so close together, and then just not even, I think, 2 months later, here we are watching what's going down with Terrence Crutcher in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so that was when I created See the Worth and decided that I'm going to take it and make it something else. See the Worth already existed since January 1 of 16, which is the same year when all of that happened. But See the Worth originally was supposed to be my reminder as Gwen C, just to finally find self-love, to finally put self-care as a priority, and all of those things that I still need today because I haven't accomplished it. But what happened is later on in that year, See the Worth transitioned into something so much greater. It was like, okay, forget you, your self-love and all that's going to have to wait because this is more important. So See the Worth became, respecting every person you meet, every situation you encounter. So that's the long answer on how See the Worth came to be. I work in human resources, so I'm not a diversity and inclusion leader because I'm more of an HR director, but I am on the Human Relations Board here in Louisville, Kentucky. So for our city, we're looking at how we can remove bias and bigotry from the community, how we can make change, how we can get people those resources. One of the things you talked about a while ago was, and I think that I remember now that you broke down the blue eyes and brown eyes for me, probably from when I was in college in psychology or something. I'm sure that was where I'd heard of it. But you had talked about that and how 1 hour. Can you imagine how people felt in 1 hour? Their stress levels, they were experiencing something that they had never experienced before. And so that's kind of like the Human Relations Commission. We're looking at ways to make sure that the folks that are in that brown eyes groups that are not being given the resources, that are constantly getting the message that they can't take up space or they don't matter, or, that they deserve less in some way. We're looking at how we can make Louisville better for every group, every population. So that's LGBTQ, it's all different ethnicities. It's folks that are new citizens to our country who have gone through citizenship process here in Louisville. It's all these things, right? And we want to make sure that we're getting people those resources because they do deserve to take up space. They do deserve fair housing. They do deserve to not be a victim of a hate crime. They do need to know that if they are discriminated against in a workplace setting or even in a retail store as a customer, whatever it might be, that they can come to this board and we're going to investigate it. And if there is law that's being broken, we're going to try to resolve it, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose. And so when you talk about the Louisville Metro Human Relations Board, as a commissioner with that, it's fulfilling. It's challenging because it's hard when you're doing something from a government entity, especially just using the last year as an example with Breonna Taylor being killed in Louisville. There's even a greater disconnect now because we haven't had any charges against the officers. So now there's even a greater disconnect between anything that is government, right? And the Louisville Metro Human Relations Board is sponsored by the government, even though it's not a paid job. I am a volunteer as a commissioner, and all of the commissioners on my board are volunteers. That logo still says Louisville Metro Human Relations. And so people see that as part of the mayor, part of the government, and it is, essentially it is. I'm not saying that it's not. We wouldn't exist if it wasn't part of the government's or the mayor's choice to have us intact, right? That's something that they choose to keep intact. But we just want to get resources to people. We want to get them fair housing, fair education. We want to make sure that people know where they can go. And so that's what the commission is all about. So when I talk about removing bigotry and bias, a lot of the times it is going to be through my commission work. I also talk about it just from being an HR director, even though I'm not a diversity and inclusion specialist. That is always part of my work because I'm not going to say any particular employer, because I think all of the employers that I've been with have had a major need to not just recruit talent from different ethnicities, but they don't know what to do with them once they get there. They don't know how to include them. And I've seen that probably in my last 4 employers. So if you know me and you know where I work, then you know the companies I'm talking about. And it's unfortunate. And it's like we get in a situation in the employer sector where we're making progress, but it's so small. And so watching from the outside, because I'm looking from an HR perspective, not from the CEO level, not from the employee level, but just watching from the outside of it all, it's like equity is so hard to build. We can create programs and policies that make it appear that we're going for equality, but getting a real level of equity inside the organizations. I mean, all of the last 4 companies that I've been with since 2009, to me, that's been an ongoing struggle for there to be true equity. And so see the worth is all of that. Sorry. So see the worth in the commission work. It's kind of all of that. It's me as a poet, how I grew up, how I was raised. I've fought for people when I shouldn't be fighting in the streets of Galveston, right? Just doing the wrong things as a teenager. But it's because I've always taken up for other people. And like I said earlier, I know that there's hidden biases that I've had as well and probably didn't even know it. And so when I'm in the workplace as an HR director, that's the thing I'm trying to do, is always make other leaders feel uncomfortable. And I'm not afraid to do it. It's probably halted my career a few times because I'm maybe doing it too aggressively. But for example, I've been known for a fact, my second 2 employers ago, I called down an director of marketing, our senior director of marketing, who is now vice president of the marketing team within that organization, for hiring people who are very similar to her. And she was from Houston. So it was heartbreaking for me. Again, being a Texas girl, I think everyone's going to think like me. And I know that sounds really naive, right? Because I was clearly in my bubble in a certain part of Texas. I wasn't everywhere. But she's from Houston, and I expected her to just really think about diversity and how she was going to build this brand new team. And by the time we were, up to 7 people for a team that never existed in this organization, that never had marketing before. And as we built it, it got to a point where, okay, even when I'm interviewing folks, I'm giving you candidates who are from a diverse population, different backgrounds. Why is it that your team now looks so much like you? And she didn't take it well at all. But, that's part of my role from a director level in HR within an organization. My goal is to make people feel uncomfortable and not just say we want equity, not just say we want inclusion, but to actually try to hold them accountable.
Well, that's good that somebody's holding them accountable, and I know when we see the movements that we've seen, like I'm thinking about, okay, so George Floyd happened. Then there was like day after day after day after day of protest all around the world. And then you started seeing all of these companies begin to say, oh, Black Lives Matter, and we're going to take Aunt Jemima down. We're going to do, and sometimes people are like, we're not really worried about Aunt Jemima. Okay, thank you for Aunt Jemima, but we need a little more of the, as you're saying, equity and equality in hiring and housing and, let's stop trying to take away our vote. Maybe let's start there. Let's deal with the school to prison pipeline. Let's start with those things that are much more not window dressing in a sense. They're not cosmetic. I think some people felt like many of the things that were happening from companies were cosmetic. They were, let's change the name of something. Let's change the symbolism of something. But nothing else is changing. Just the box. Right. The box is changing, and so some people, it's like you had these two groups, the one group saying, you're getting all these changes. What are you complaining about? Everything's changing. We can't even, Dr. Seuss is even changing, everything is changing. And we're like, those were not the changes we were asking for. Right. Dr. Seuss really never affected our lives all that much, and that was that family deciding to pull those books, not necessarily anyone else. So it was a very interesting, it's been very interesting living these past, few years, especially the past year, to see all of the changes that have happened. I'm a teacher, so I tell my students, I said, pay attention because you're living through history. People are going to be talking about this. They're going to ask you what it was like to live through 2020, to live through 2021. What was it like when you had COVID and the second civil rights movement, and you had, all of these things happening, the insurrection at the Capitol? What was that like? So I was like, please pay attention.
Right.
And pay attention to what's going on around you. Pay attention to what you see, what you hear. This is history making. And as a poet, it is, I have written so much poetry about kind of the history of this moment and just all of the things that it brought up for me, coming from a background of people who were very politically active, very activist oriented, and just seeing where we are now versus where we were in my parents' day, my grandparents' day, and seeing how racism shows up now, because my grandparents, they dealt with the Klan, they dealt with the crosses being burned, they dealt with, being pulled off of the Freedom Rider buses, they dealt with all of that. My parents too, I've never had to deal with that. I've had a different experience, but it's still part of the same tree.
Right. It's in the doctor's office now, or it's in the classroom, or it's at work.
Yeah. And so it's a beautiful thing. I love allies. I love people that are coming in and they're doing what they can, where they can, how they can. and it's organic and it's heartfelt. I think that's a beautiful thing, when people just pitch in wherever they are to try to make a difference. Because I really do feel that grassroots change is lasting change in many cases, when it comes from the ground and it's organic and it's spreading out, and people are being changed in communities. Community by community is changing. I think that that's where you can see a lot of transformation, and it's very inspiring. So movements like See the Worth, I think, are really great and really powerful. And when you have a lot of little lights around the country, around the world, we end up with a much more inspiring and equitable, healthy, whole world. So I think it's a great thing. So
Thank you for that.
oh, you're
I
welcome.
think that it's like you said, the grassroots change. And, when you talk about the protests and stuff, people, like you said, 2020 is like living through history. Yes, we survived. We're here now, right? And there are still people protesting in Louisville every day. Is the crowd the same size that it was in June, July, August, September, October, November? No, it's not. It's still, but there is still a core group of people who have not quit. And I was out there. I even took my sons, my husband. We all went out there several times, but there came a time when we stopped, and that we stopped because we were in tear gas one time. We stopped because, okay, we're not gonna. That was just me and my husband and one of my sons. Thank goodness. I don't look like the mom that's putting her children in danger for protests. But my youngest, he's 12, and he's, if anybody in this family is going to change the world, it might be him. He doesn't want to stop. He just wants to keep going. And but what I was going to say is, people need to recognize that in a global pandemic, folks were still willing to be out there. And there are still folks that are out there that were part of those original groups, and they're still fighting here in Louisville for justice for Breonna. They're not giving up. I can't say that I'm one of them. I haven't been out there in months. I haven't been out probably since October. It came a time where I went back after we found out they weren't going to deliver any charges. The attorney general got that wrong. So that was a time for us to go out and speak louder and bring us all out again. But not just in Louisville, but everywhere, right? Like you said, around the world. I have poets that I've performed with that live in London, and they're like, London was going crazy because of George Floyd. I mean, this was not just here. And that should be a wake-up call. People need to understand that folks were risking their life to go out and speak for something that is wrong. It's just not something. We will never probably go through another global pandemic, right? And so I believe that folks genuinely risk their life to go out and be outside and to be in the streets and to protest what happened to George Floyd. And if that's not a wake-up call for people whose eyes are closed, I don't know what else is or will be, other than the revolution. I mean, I just don't know what else it could be. I mean, what else can it be? That is like, so, to me, it's just mind-boggling that some people still don't get it.
It is mind-boggling. And I can't remember who said it, but there was this famous quote: "The revolution will not be televised." And then when all the George Floyd protests happened, people were like, well, yeah, it is. It's being televised. They didn't get the point of that statement. The point of the statement was the revolution is in the mind. It's in the hearts of people. The revolution was not televised because you saw the effects of the revolution. The effect was that people watched George Floyd, being murdered in the street, and their mind became revolutionary. Their heart became revolutionary. That wasn't televised. And then you saw the after effect of millions of people, the biggest protest ever that's happened in anywhere worldwide, happened day after day after day after day after day after day. And, I've been to more protests than I can count. I just was at not a protest, but I was at a rally for Joshua Johnson. We did an artist rally. We had Congressman Al Green there because he was a unarmed Black man that was killed in Houston, and we've been trying for a year to get an indictment for him. On the officer that killed him. So So we just did another another artist rally and getting the congressman to come and speak on his behalf, and basically to say, hey, we're still calling for justice. We haven't forgotten. We are still here. We are still here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother thing that I think a lot of things thrive in the darkness, bias being one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
when you shine that light and you say, look at what you're thinking, look at what you're saying, look at how you're portraying things, look at
Right.
the injustice. And then people are pulled kicking and screaming into the light sometimes, then it's hard for them to stand up under that scrutiny. And sometimes they have to change what they're doing. They may not have changed their mindset, but some do,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to change what they're portraying. And
Right.
I do feel that we've seen a lot of changes in how things are being portrayed. I remember years ago, I was listening to a speaker, and she was talking about the casual killing law. And this was a law like in the late 1700s, where it was during slavery, of course, where there were so many children being killed by the mistresses of the plantation, that there was a fear that these women were going to be prosecuted. So they created this law that said if you were to kill a slave in the procedure or the process of disciplining them, that was a justified killing,
Mm-hmm.
and there would be no repercussions for you. And I bring that up because even though we don't call it the casual killing law, the idea that almost every time that we have a person who's killed by law enforcement, they start with, well, he had a history of, and he probably was resisting arrest, and he shouldn't have been carrying loose cigarettes, and he shouldn't have whatever, whatever, whatever. But the point is, the cops should not be judge, jury, and executioner, and they should be able to de-escalate. They should be able to, if we look at other places in the world, they can go decades without a police killing. Some of them have never had a police killing, but we have one almost every day in
Right.
America. White, black, Asian, Hispanic, the race is not the issue. It is the excessive use of force and the idea that there's qualified immunity, and the reinvention of the Casual Killing Act in terms of, hey, if you are disciplining them, if you are thinking that they did something, it should be justified. Yeah, it should be justified. So we have kind of rebranded that as kind of shoot first, ask questions later, or as they must be guilty until they're proven innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we say that it's innocent until proven guilty, the reality is many times it's the opposite in the way the world operates. Well, at least the way America operates. But I think that there's so many communities that are saying this is not acceptable. We are not going to tolerate it anymore. There needs to be many non-lethal, ways to deal with people. There needs to be much more training on community relations, de-escalation, negotiation, communication tactics, getting other people involved. Like the cops don't need to go to everything. Let's get some social workers. Let's get some other, mental health professionals. Let's get some other people. If it's a mental health issue, don't send the cops.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Someone else. So, these different things. So communities are saying we're going to revamp. We're going to take the bias off of, this is the way we've always done it, and say we're going to start from scratch. Let's figure out a better way. Let's look at this differently. If we were to start over again, take all the biases off. Let's look at our community. Let's look at the issues we have. How could we do this better? How could we re-engineer this system so it actually works for us, so that we are actually protecting and serving? And I think that that's one of the greatest things that's come out of this, is that many people are saying, let's throw out all of the precedents and let's think, and instead of going from here's what we've always done. Let's tweak it. No, let's throw out what we've always done. Let's start over.
Right.
I think it was Camden that actually dismantled their whole police system and started over again from like hiring all the way training. Everybody had to reapply for their job after they went through a whole restructuring of everything.
That's the way it should be.
Hey,
that to me, that seems like the solution at this point. You're on point with it, because what we find, like with the commission, we will have, calls and where we're sort of making demands on our new chief and things like that. But we don't see any changes because of the police union. We will say that, we have a liaison who comes to every single meeting that we have regarding the police, and her goal is to improve communication between our board and the policing. And we find that the things that we've been asking for, we were asking for when I became a commissioner in October of 2017. And we're still asking for the same things today. So unless you dismantle it, like you're saying, and rebuild it completely in a changed format, we're not going to see that change, because we are still asking to this day. And like I said, I joined in 2017 in October. We're still asking for more community involvement. Get to know your residents, get to know the people in the places that you're patrolling, have those relationships. We're still asking for the same thing. And clearly that's not working. So and we're still asking for hidden bias training and force training and all of these different things to be looked at, but it's still supported by the police union, the way they're doing things today. So the way we've always done it is still a factor. We're not seeing that type of change. So until, if dismantling it is the option that's going to make an actual change, then that's the time has come to do that, because there's no more time to waste. And, for the people that aren't on board, you don't want to waste your money, right? So the folks that only care about the money and not the people, well, hey, it's a win for you too, because then your tax dollars aren't going into the same programs over and over that are just reinforcing what's already broken.
I was on a podcast recently, and I guess the host, he asked me to come on and talk about critical race theory. And he was talking about how it was being applied up north, and it was trying to make all the white students feel like, hey, you're all racist and you should be ashamed of your white ancestors and you should just walk around ashamed of your white skin and all that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. It's a shame that we have this pendulum and it wants to swing all the way to the other side. And, I was saying to him, that's not, critical race theory has been around since 1978, I believe. And it was not created to make anyone feel inferior.
Right.
It was created to show the systematic oppression of, minorities. It was created to show how the legal system had been used, that this country was founded. Let's go back to, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed with their creator with these inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, except that all men meant white, educated, wealthy landowners.
Right.
That's it. Those four things. If you weren't white, educated, wealthy, and a landowner, you were not considered a citizen. You had no rights. So all of the laws that were created during that time were for those men with those qualities, and it all protected them. Everyone else had no protection under the law. And so when we're talking about critical race theory, it's saying this is what our legal system is built on, protecting white, educated, wealthy landowners.
Right.
And so we have to look back, because the legal system is built on precedent, right? They go back and they say, this is the precedent, this is the precedent, this is the precedent. Well, if the precedent is white, wealthy landowners, okay, who are educated, and you're not one of those people, then the precedent is normally against you. it's
Right.
not in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't the fact that there was anything wrong with being that. It was the fact that
Mm-hmm.
it was completely biased. It
That is
shut
true.
out everyone who wasn't in that group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what critical race theory was supposed to say. Let's look back, let's hold this law up and say, is it actually built on the idea of protecting white, wealthy, educated landowners? If it is, we need to rethink this law. We need to
Mm-hmm.
change it so that it protects all citizens and it doesn't discriminate against anybody.
Right.
And that's the whole basis of critical race theory. It wasn't about, oh, you're so horrible because you're white. No, that's not what it was about. It was about the historical facts of the way this nation was founded and the laws that were put in place. So I was trying to show him that. I was like, and people have misused it to make us say all kinds of things. It's not what it was intended to do.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at our system and we wonder why it's biased, that's why it's biased. That's
Right.
the foundation of it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And you and I would have been shut out of that white wealthy landowning
Exactly. Exactly.
group.
You nailed it. You
So
nailed it. That is
you and I
accurate.
would have been in the exact same boat,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of having no rights and
Right.
no say, you know.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter that your skin color is different than mine. We would have still been in the exact same
Mm-hmm.
position, you
Yep.
know, legally. So it's very interesting that people don't understand that, or that they see something the way it is applied now and don't say, hey, let's stop applying this, misapplying this, and
Right.
let's actually use it for what it was supposed to do, which
Mm-hmm.
is cause us to look at our biases, cause us to take the law as not a perfect instrument. It's not a perfect instrument. It
Right.
is created by men, and it's something that we need to reevaluate from time to
Mm-hmm.
time. And we need to challenge, and we need to create new laws that reflect our new understanding of what America should be.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting. I just did this workshop for National Poetry Month, and it was with Ed Mabry, and so I was a participant, learning all kinds of amazing things from Ed, right? And one day we had to, just a couple of days ago, recently, near the end, we had to write questions that were unanswerable. Well, I really struggle with writing stuff that's not political these days because I've been so heavily influenced into writing political for the last 5 or 6 years that I really struggle when I try to write anything that's not political. But we were supposed to write a poem that was all unanswerable questions. So phenomenal chance to be really abstract and create really amazing stuff. And it just didn't work out for me that way, because my first question was, why does the Constitution fall, or something? Why does the Constitution fall when it's supposed to stand? And basically I was saying it tells everyone, right? It's failing, it's not working. But, you know, it just, when you were talking about that, it just reminded me of how we just have so much work to do. We need so much change.
that's true. But, I'm glad even having conversations like this, whenever I feel like things aren't changing fast enough, or I wish things had gone differently, I think about the conversations that people are having. And for you and I to be on this platform discussing this, I don't see that this would have been happening 10 years ago, 20 years ago. People weren't having these kind of conversations that I saw, maybe
Right.
in academic circles, maybe
Right.
on, college campuses, but just out in everyday life, I don't remember seeing these kind of things going on. So it's definitely inspiring to me that people are thinking about these things, talking about these things, and doing something about these things, protesting, creating organizations, trying to get people galvanized, trying to get people organized, trying to, challenge the status quo in whatever little
Mm-hmm.
small way that they're doing it. And I believe that poetry is very powerful in terms of it slides in under your defenses, kind of like comedy. You're laughing and then you go, ooh, ouch, and then you were
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, that went in, and you have to think about what you just heard, and poetry does the same thing. You're kind of captivated by the rhythm and the rhyme and the imagery, and then you're like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's something I hadn't thought about before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with
So
that.
I know that you have a book, and I think you also do slam, right? Too, or you used
I've kind of got into slam a little bit here in the last 3 or 4 years, and yeah, I don't consider myself a slammer. I really did it out of just necessity. Um, I think bias works both ways. Um, like you said at the beginning of this, sometimes we miss out on opportunities because of our own bias, but bias works in lots of different ways, angles, and directions. And so, lack of inclusion for me in poetry in this particular market, once I stopped hosting my own shows and doing my own events, it didn't really leave me a lot of opportunity other than maybe some open mics here and there. And so I decided that I would start slamming because there's always a space in slamming to go and make your points. I don't mind slamming, especially now that I've gotten used to it, but I would rather just continue to perform in places that is going to impact the most people. Because again, a lot of the poems that I'm sharing these days are to make people uncomfortable and to make them question, their beliefs and how they're operating on a daily basis. So that's kind of how I got into slam, just more or less by default. I don't think that I ever really planned to do it. I just did.
I gotcha. You
Yeah.
know, as a page poet for most of my life, like I've only done spoken word for 4 years. There's two different worlds, at least in Houston. It's like you have the page poets that are everything's on the page and they recite sometimes, and some of their poetry is very esoteric, and it's like you almost need to read it to understand it because you're like, well, I just heard you recite that,
Yeah,
but I'm a poet,
I
but
need to
I
see
didn't,
it.
can
Mhm.
I see it? Can I read it again? You know, um, so some of it is very relatable and some of it is not.
Mhm.
And then you have spoken word, which can be all kinds of things, erotic and political, and everything. It can be everything under the sun. You have slam, and these are kind of different little worlds. And
Mhm.
so going from one into another, it's like being immersed in a different kind of culture.
Mhm.
And even you're talking about biases, like for the longest time I was a page poet, I'm like, I was intimidated by spoken word artists for a while. I was like, I don't know if I could do that. And then my
Mhm.
mom was like, what do you mean? It's your words. You think you can't memorize your own words and perform? I was like, well, I guess you're right. I
Mhm.
guess I can. And then slam again is intimidating in itself. You got the timers, you got the judges, you got
Mhm.
the huge audiences,
Mhm.
prizes. People are super serious about it. I mean, super serious. So it's like, okay, this is a whole different aspect of it. So and then people have their own biases about what it means if you are this or that or the other. You
Mhm.
must be this or you must be that or the other. So it's very interesting. But I look at it all as it's art, it's beautiful,
Mhm.
it's life, it's breath. It's wisdom and creativity, it's all these things. So
Right.
I like floating into one space and floating into the other space, and when that one gets a
Feel
little
that
too
way.
hot, float back out. you know
I love that. Yeah, no, that's perfect. And that's what you have to do. Just because you're in a certain space at a certain time doesn't mean that's where you have to stay. And just keep floating back and forth and go where it feels right at the time. I love that you've been through all of the different worlds.
yeah, I have been. So what is your book? I think you had
Oh,
published a book. Yeah.
cool. Okay, so poetry, I actually have 6 books. Um, my first one was in 2015. I'm not going to sit here and break down what they all are and what they're about. The first one was just a compilation of, I think, like 64 poems, all different topics, love, relationships. My first dabble into political pieces after Freddie Gray and what happened with his spine. And just, that was just kind of the beginning when I was starting to transition really to get away from love and relationship pieces and self-care pieces and really starting to go political. But then I published a total of 6 poetry books. My baby, my heart and soul. Oh my gosh, definitely my heart and soul of all my books. I think I say that every time, but this one's never going to change. The title is the revolution will not be social mediaized. And I think I published that in 2019. So the timing could not be, it to me, and it's supposed to be obviously a sarcastic title because even though, like you said, it starts in the brain, it starts in the heart, that's where revolution occurs. People are going to see it. And with the world being so driven by social media and all the different platforms, that was the title of my book. I love that book. The last words in that book are Tamir Rice. So just the way that I formatted it to make sure that, he was the one, because I felt like he's having the driving factor behind that entire book. And then my most recent book is a totally different perspective. It's called Hue Caller. I actually have it here with me today because this is 50 leadership essentials for humility, unity, and equity. So that's where the hue comes from. And I'll just put my secret out. I named it Hue Caller just because of Huey P. Newton. So that's why I wanted to have the hue in there, and that's where it came from. But this is more driven toward, the workplace or commission or how you should interact with others. So it has basically 50 essentials, but they're broken down into some different categories here. And if you don't mind, can I read just the last couple of paragraphs of this book?
Sure.
Because we talked about earlier, and this came out in 2020. So we talked about just how like living through history, and it just reminded me when you were talking about living through history, it reminded me of the end of this book. So it's talking about 2020, and if there's ever a time, if you can't remember a challenge, then just think back to 2020 and you'll definitely remember a lot of challenge, right? Two major ones. So it says, together we learned more about ourselves, together we overcame. Parents, families, entire communities, and all the systems within them had to change almost instantly. While working as one, we reconnected with each other. While being apart, we found gratitude and unity. We fought, we embarked, we embraced. We traveled back in time and hoped for a future. We took on two necessary journeys that required different directions. One that required sacrifice in our homes, one that required sacrifice outside of them, both equally important and urgent. We masked to fight madness, and it wasn't a masquerade. We caravanned the year, gave us no need to parade. So just, that's just like my reflection. Really, it's just the last two about masking and caravanning, because when I would take my boys out, I wouldn't let them protest on foot. So we would always be in the car part of that. I let them out a couple of times because they wanted that experience. But as a mom, I couldn't necessarily say, oh yeah, I'm totally fine having my 12-year-old out there, my 13-year-old. They were 11 and 10, 11 and 9, 11 and 12 at the time. But long story short, I think the last two statements in this book really just sum up the entire 2020, for so many of us. But the book itself is about how to lead, how to be a partner, how to be a collaborator in the workplace or in projects that you're involved in. Because I think what happens is people, they get so focused on achieving their goals and dreams that they don't realize, and that doesn't mean that everybody does it, not by any means, but people don't realize when they're doing the wrong thing. So this book is really geared about keeping that humility in mind. The unity factor should always be there. If you're going to go far and be successful, unity is necessary. You can achieve things by yourself, but what good is that when you can achieve things as a partner or collaborator to someone else? I mean, to me, that's where it's the best outcome for everybody involved. And then obviously everything that you should do should be geared toward creating equity, whether it's in a workplace or in your personal life. If you're not willing to create equity in the spaces that you take up, then you don't deserve space. So that's it.
That's quite a powerful statement. Okay.
You got to want equity, or you don't deserve to have any space. You just get this little spot. That's all you get.
I gotcha. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I wanted you to tell the people where they can find you. Where can they find your books?
All right. So all of the books are self-published. So of course I used Amazon, but anyone can reach out to me. It's Gwen C, CEE, and that's on pretty much every social media, or Gwen C Poetry, Gmail, Gwen C Poetry, and poetry is TREE. But you can always find me anywhere for Gwen C if you are interested, have orders. I do all kinds of custom gift sets for folks. If they're interested in books, they get free gifts. I just really try to keep it where it's custom, because I know that everyone has a different budget and a different idea of what they might be interested in. I also do paintings. That's something that I've taken on in the last few years. So a lot of times if someone wants to order a book, they might get a free painting or vice versa. CDs, I do have two CDs out. The first one was released in 2014 and actually has some really dope tracks on it from some other artists that I was able to collaborate with. One of them is Lance Newman, who's amazing, Mr. Spread Love. He let me include one of his tracks. And then also Vernay, which is a hip hop song, and it's amazing. So the first CD is more poetry about love, relationships, some political. It's kind of goes along with the first book. You know, it's kind of a blend of everything. And the most recent CD is actually See the Worth. So See the Worth is music and poetry. So it has, like every other song, is an actual studio produced track. So if you like music and poetry, you'll kind of get a good blend of that. If you just like music, you'll still like it. And I usually try to do like a free CD or whatever with someone is interested in books. But really, it's about getting See the Worth out there. I will give the CD away because I want people to hear See the Worth. I want people to listen to See the Worth. I want them to play it to other folks that maybe just, you know, don't understand. Still, with all that they're seeing, they still need another source to shove that down their throat. Well, let me be that person, because that's what See the Worth is. You know, it's a free track. If you can go out and download it. Some places I know that I had it set up to be free. So that's it. Gwency everywhere.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that I have, but please like, share, you know, this video, send it to all your friends, you know, so that they can get her work. They can hear us talking about bias, you know, try to challenge your own biases. I actually created something that this is my personal development package, Zennurgize Your Life, which is a workbook of 20 pages. And every page is about breaking through your biases. It's about really thinking about who you are, what you value, your priorities. So every page is different.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. So this is actually what a page looks like inside that's blank. So each page is a different topic. The first one is abundance. So you actually go through, you answer the journal prompts in the journal, and then you put a song, a movie, a book, an affirmation, a goal. This is your vision board space. And you put someone who's already passed on that you are inspired by. And then someone who, yeah. So basically you put pictures in here. Someone who's contemporary that you're inspired by. And I'll show you what mine looks like, because, you know, I've finished mine. So this is my first page. You can see, you know, I've got Langston Hughes. He was the first writer, poet that made a living from his writing. I've got Oprah Winfrey. And then you can watch YouTube videos on these people, take notes on them. What can you learn from them? You know, the book that you put down, read it, listen to it on audio, take notes on it. I mean, books expand our ideas. They give us new things to think about. And then, you know, you just keep going through and you just keep finding out about people that can inspire your life. You keep writing your goals down. You keep, you know, answering different journal questions so you can kind of really get focused on where you want to go, where you are, what you're doing, you know, so you just have page after page to really explore. And I do have videos where I've done workshops with this where you can get those. You also have stickers in the package, you know, where you put your goals down. You can actually put the stickers when you finish your goals. You got a little bookmark in there. You got a motivational band over here, this little motivational band right here, you know, so you have all kinds of little things that keep you motivated. And of course you have the podcast Zennergy, because every one of those topics actually is covered on the podcast. I also have, we got Mother's Day coming up. So these are magnetic bookmarks. They each have, you know, positive sayings, so they slide on the page, so they're not going to fly out. You know, so this is actually $6 for 6 different motivational sayings. And I actually have ones that have affirmations on them. Like this one says, I am safe. You know, so I have control of many things in my life. I am peaceful. You know, I have these things called smiley cards. They have like positive sayings on them. Like this one says, today is your day. So there's like 10 cards in here that have different sayings. And this is another, you know, set of the motivational bookmarks. I also have different bands. You know, I showed you those. So there's a bunch of different colors. And I have keychains. Like this one says create. You know, so these are pretty sturdy. So like create, dream, inspire, hope. You know, so, and these are just $1, but they're going to last, you know, so dream, believe. So I have stuff for all different, you know, price ranges, starting at $1, going up to, you know, some of my shirts are 20, 25. You know, I have pillows, totes, all kind of leggings, blankets, all kind of motivational sayings on there. So you can check out the merch at Laughs and Lyrics, LAUGHZAND lyrics.com, and laughsinlyricsmerch.com. So LAUGHZN, the letter N, lyricsmerch.com. And I'll put all of this in the description. So hopefully you can check her out. You can check me out. Mother's Day is coming up. We all could use some motivation. Grab you some little motivational things, a couple of dollars. You could spend more than that, but you can get you some things that you can look at. Every time you look at it, it reminds you to feel good, think positively, and try to make the best of your life, And so thank you for joining us, and may you walk in Zennurgy.